Hey folks, sorry I can't be with you to start this lab for today. I just wanted to show you how we're going to test for hardness of minerals using something called the scratch test, and all the equipment for that is in these little kits. So here's our kit for determining hardness using the Mohs hardness scale. Please pay attention as you open these. Make sure you take note of how things are organized. Everything's got its own little bag, so make sure things get put back in that order. Keep everything nice for the next group who has to use this. They open up at the front here. Just pull up that tab and then lift out. And let's see what we've got in here. The first thing you'll see is the paper says Mohs hardness scale on it. We're going to need that. But the other papers that are in here, the teacher guide and the laboratory guide, these are the things that I'm going to talk about in the video. So you can set those off to the side. You've got a second hardness scale with some example minerals on the side, so we'll keep that out. We've got a few minerals that we can test with. So this one is rose quartz. We've got pyrite and lodestone here. So 3 minerals to test. We've also got in this little bubble wrap stuff, we've got a streak plate. We've got a strip of copper, a nail, and last up, inside this little plastic, we have a piece of glass, very thin piece of glass, pretty delicate, so be very, very careful with this. Don't want any injuries with this lab. Okay, put this down. All right, so at the front, I've got the tools for testing the hardness, and then at the back are the things that we're going to test, the piece of mineral that we're trying to find the hardness for. Now, if you look at the hardness scales, they rank things on a scale of 1 to 10. So on these, the 1s, those are the softest materials, the softest minerals, and the 10s are the hardest materials. So we've got diamond listed at number 10. That is the hardest mineral. Notice that there's no example of diamond here for obvious reasons. The way that we determine how hard or soft a mineral is using something called the scratch test. The idea being that if we have two materials where one is harder than the other, the harder one can scratch the softer one, but the softer one cannot scratch the harder one. So if I took, say, gypsum and feldspar here and here, feldspar is much harder, so I should be able to take the feldspar and use it to scratch into the gypsum. But if I held onto the gypsum and tried to scratch the feldspar with it, I wouldn't get any scratches there. It would just keep wearing away the gypsum. So the harder one scratches the softer one. Now, rather than testing with the minerals themselves, we're going to test with some common everyday items that are listed out here. So some of them are listed on this one, but use this sheet for this part. We've got a fingernail described there. Hopefully you brought yours with you. Your fingernail has a hardness that's between 2 and 3. So if you can scratch that mineral with your fingernail, it means your fingernail is harder. So that limits us to either a 2 or a 1 on the hardness scale. It definitely couldn't be a 3 because if your fingernail scratches it, well, then it must be softer than your fingernail. Next up, we've got a penny. Instead of a penny, they have these copper strips included, which are nice because they're not all scratched up to begin with, like pennies often are. As we're working through this, materials like this, they get used up the more that we scratch at them. So I just ask, as you're testing to see, can you scratch the copper? Just test it once. You don't need to draw a design in it or write your name or scratch back and forth. Just one quick scratch across the copper is plenty on this. You can tell whether it scratches or not that way. So if it scratches the copper, the penny would be made out of copper. If it scratches the copper, then it must be harder than the copper. And if the copper can scratch the mineral, then the copper must be harder. So we just go through this whole process trying to figure out what scratches what. Where's our limit where we can no longer scratch the material. So let me take you through one example one that we're not doing here. And that is the sulfur. So sulfur Well, first thing on the list, I'm just going to start low and work my way up. If sulfur is very soft, a 2 or a 1, then I should be able to scratch it with my fingernail, and it shouldn't, the sulfur shouldn't be able to scratch my fingernail. So I'm going to check that first. I'm just going to scratch with my fingernail. It's a lovely sound. All right, and I see a little bit of sulfur dust on my finger now. So that makes me think that I was able to scratch some of this off. There are cases though where little bits of it are just brittle and they'll break off. So you want to test both ways. So my fingernail, I think it scratched it. It's a little tough to tell though. It could just be little parts breaking off too. So let's see the other direction. Can I scratch my fingernail with the sulfur? So I scratch here, and then, I'm seeing more sulfur here on my fingernail, and I don't see any scratch marks on my fingernail. So that one says to me, sulfur must be softer than my fingernail is, which puts it at either a 2 or a 1. So that's the process on sulfur. If it had been able to scratch my fingernail, I move on and see, can it scratch the copper? Can the copper scratch it? And then we just place it on the scale. Notice that there aren't items to check with at every level. So let's say I found that my mineral was able to scratch a streak plate, but I don't have anything else to test with. All I know then is that it's harder than a streak plate, which means 7, 8, 9, or 10. I can't do anything better than that. I can't narrow it down to this one is an 8 or this one's a 9. It's just 7 through 10 somewhere. If it scratches a penny but it can't scratch the glass or the steel nail, glass and steel nail are both between 5 and 6, then I know that it must be a 4 or a 5. It's got to be between those hardnesses. So you may have a range of hardnesses instead of just a single value on these. So watch for that. Please take good care of the minerals and of the equipment that we are using here. These are fairly expensive sets, and I want to make sure that I can use them for years to come here so we don't use more of our budget on these. Thanks very much. Please take good care and help each other out when somebody else needs it. Thank you.